Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are having a spirited discussion of the essential episodes for season 1. Now, Entertainment Weekly ranked 75 episodes out of seasons 1 through 14 that they deemed to be, in their opinion, essential. And of course, so that took some episodes from each season, roughly 4 or 5 essential episodes per season. I wrote an article series taking some exception to their essentials, and I'm interested to see what our panelists think were the most essential episodes of season 1 and why, and how that connects to what Entertainment Weekly deemed essential. But first, let's start with introductions, starting with Elektra.
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and a copy editor, and you can find out everything you need to know about me at untilmidnight.com.
Alex?
Hey guys, I'm Alexander Gideon. I'm the author of A Web of Crimson, the first book of the law from the Shadow Council archives, published through Falstaff Books. You can find me on social media. Basically, if you just search Alexander Gideon, you'll pretty much pull me up.
Carol?
Yes, I'm Carol Malcolm. I am the director of the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track, and Gail has been part of a series that I started in this virtual world that we live in, which I call Supernatural Rewind, where we have been going over, having like a season review once a month. That was after we finished the last episodes of season 15 when they came back out. And so this has been a lot of fun. We just did season 1 a few months ago. So I feel as though I was pretty prepared. I sat and looked through all my notes, but I hope that anybody who is following these panels might be interested in coming and looking at ours as well. So.
Oh, absolutely. They are so much fun. And it's just been a blast to go back and do the rewind. Angela, how about you?
I'm Angela Breen. I write romantic suspense, which you can find at angelabreen.club. And I also write urban fantasy and paranormal romance as Cameron J. Quinn, which you can find at CameronQuinnBooks.com.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. All of my modern worlds are worlds Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. And I'm also a columnist now for the Winchester Family Business. And as Carol mentioned, I'm on a lot of DragonCon Urban Fantasies panels about Supernatural, because I'll talk about my favorite show all day long. So,
yeah, and you do on some days, don't you?
I do, and I love those days.
You really do.
They make me very happy. So let's look at what Entertainment Weekly deemed essential, and then we can have that spirited discussion we promised people. So they included the pilot, of course, Faith, the Benders, and Devil's Trap, 4 episodes out of season 1. So there's a whole lot of episodes that they didn't include. All right. What do you think of that? And what would, if you had to pick maybe 4 or 5 essential episodes, what would yours be and why? And what would you fight Entertainment Weekly on? Elektra?
Well, the first one I'd fight them on is because I have 20/20 hindsight, and I'd say you have to include Dead Man's Blood. Mm-hmm. Because it completes the circle to season 15.
It's true. Which in their defense, they didn't know yet because this came out before season 15 aired. But
but we have 20/20 hindsight, so you have to include that one. I'm iffy on the Benders. I mean, it's scary, but there are other things where they run into creepy people that are just as creepy later. So I'd say that one can go out the window.
Okay. And any that you would add besides Dead Man's Blood?
Goodness. Home. Absolutely. That gives us so much other good stuff about them, and it brings in Missouri and psychics, and that's just so important. The revelation of I went to Missouri and I found things out was just so there for me.
Well, not to mention that, while we don't see nearly as much of Missouri Mosley as I think most of us would have liked to, we saw Mary Winchester for the first time, and that becomes a much bigger deal than anyone ever expected in season 1. So if you're putting the essentials list together with that benefit of hindsight 2020 vision, that's kind of a big thing. Alex, how about you?
So I'll definitely agree. I think Home is probably the most important episode of the season. It's the one that furthers the story more than anything else in that season. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first time that we get a premonition out of Sam, and it's definitely the first time that Sam lets Dean know that he's having these premonitions. And of course, we know how very important that is for that first 5 season arc. We get to see John there with Missouri. You kind of bring the whole family together, because you see John, you see Mary, you see the boys in that episode. I definitely would have to agree that the Benders can go out of there. I think, other than a lot of the just Monster of the Week episodes are fun, but they're not essential. Other ones I can think of is like the Bloody Mary, Hookman, Bugs.
Oh God. Please take Bugs. I never want to see that one again.
I think we all just skip over episode 8.
There was one quote I noticed when I was doing the rewind for Carol, where Sam starts that episode out really angry at John, and because of the dynamic between the son and his father in the house in Bugs, at the end of the episode, he says he wants to find John because he has some, he's ready to reconcile. And that plays a big part going on, but you do have to get through the whole episode and all the bugs to get it.
For that one moment there. I definitely agree that Dead Man's Blood is really important as well. I mean, not only does it come full circle, but it establishes vampires. I believe is the first time we see the vampires in the series. And honestly, there's so much that's really important, because it's establishing things that are so important later on. I think Faith is a good one. One that they had put on there. It definitely establishes Reapers. I don't know if I would consider it one of the 4 most essential, though, honestly. But definitely Dead Man's Blood. I mean, we get the cult in that episode. That's super important going forward as well. And for me, it's episode 2, Wendigo. That episode might be my favorite episode of the entire series. I've watched it. I think I've watched it more than like anything else. And to me, the pilot starts it off, but I think that in episode 2, we really get down into the feeling of supernatural, of how the whole show feels. So I think that one's really important as well.
And those guys come back later as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which, what's funny is when Entertainment Weekly re-ranked all 15 seasons, Bugs was 327th and Wendigo was 326.
Oh no.
Go figure. Carol, how about you?
Well, the funny thing is I do have a list myself that I made earlier today. And I've got to say that as far as Entertainment Weekly's list goes, that I also had 3 of those on there, and that was the pilot, Faith, and Devil's Trap. Now, the one that I disagree with the most of theirs is the Benders, because that one I would say that could go, and I would be perfectly happy. I did not enjoy that episode, and I just, I don't know. I think they could have done without it, but. And of course, Bugs I've never watched, on purpose. The first time around, it was because, the old story, my VCR back in the day, back when it first aired, my VCR messed up and didn't record it. So I didn't see it. And then when I found out what it was about, I was like, yeah, no, I don't need to see that. And then even though I've had the DVD set for years, when I was doing the rewind, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it even now. But in any case, so we can take those two out, and I'd be good with that. But I do want to say a couple of the reasons why I agreed with Faith was that I mean, the story itself was interesting, but to me, I thought it was very interesting that we got at least two instances of foreshadowing. The first one being when the preacher tells Dean, I didn't pick you, Dean, the Lord did. And then later in that same episode, when they're trying to figure out how can they stop the Reaper and all this stuff, Dean says to Sam, well, we can't kill death. I'm thinking, just wait, buddy, just wait. So I thought that, that was kind of interesting looking at it from having seen further down the road. Was that foreshadowing as far as they're concerned? I don't know, but it is foreshadowing for what we know came later, when we're watching it. And then there's also another passage where the whole reason they're there at this faith healer is because Dean is dying. And Dean says to Sam, I'm gonna die and you can't stop it. And Sam says, watch me. And it's like, well, we know that's going to go on for a long time. I mean, that kind of sets the tone for a lot of what you see. Now, I did enjoy Bloody Mary. And the reason I think that I enjoyed that one is that I think it's a classic. And of all of the really early episodes, that was one of the ones I could remember the best, even though I hadn't seen it in probably at least 10 years. And I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be good. And even though I didn't remember all of it, scene by scene or anything, to me, it has some of the creepiest images. And I really liked it for that reason. I thought they did a good job of kind of setting the stage for what kinds of things we could expect from the series, kind of like Wendigo was for you, Alex. So, but for me, that one kind of hit. And that's also when we found out about Sam's visions. And people mentioned Home, which I also have on my list. And I did want to say too, and I think that Elektra, that you had mentioned Dead Man's Blood, that also appears on mine as well. And one of the reasons why is that well, for one thing, we get John admitting his failings as a father. It's nice to hear him actually admit to some stuff that we've all been thinking, because this is the 20th episode of the season. And so it's like, we've been thinking this all, and for him to kindly to own up to some of it. But then there's the point where when John and Dean and Sam come up to the vampires on the highway, and they've got them basically cornered because they've got the cult. And Luther questions, he says, well, why won't you people just leave us in peace? And to me, that's always been a very, it's a timely question all along, throughout the series. And we see that, yes, they do make their peace with certain of the creatures they're supposed to be hunting. But I thought that was a significant episode for that reason as well, just that they brought up that aspect of what they do. And I've got a couple others, but I won't shut up now.
Well, we're gonna work through the whole season here.
Okay.
Those ideas. Angela, how about you?
So for me, I actually the Monster of the Week episodes to the main story. So Wendigo was that was my number one episode for sure. Because I agree with Alex. I think it kind of set up the whole series. It was one of the scarier episodes, and it had the constant kind of suspense and something's hunting you, which is basically the vibe of the whole thing. So that was kind of my number one. And then the other one that I would add is actually Route 666. Is it 666 or 66? Because I like any time that we get a snippet from Dean's past, because we get a lot of the stuff from them when they're kids, but Dean has this whole kind of period where Sam is in college and he's out hunting and we don't. So I like anything that has to do with that time period. So I liked that little snippet into his past life, in particular, Cassie,
When
who
he
was
left
his first love.
girls all across the country.
Yeah, that. And I really liked Cassie. I liked her character, and I liked getting to see Dean kind of thrown off his confidence and everything. I just loved that episode.
Okay. As much as I love the Benders as a pure horror episode, I agree that from an arc perspective, it wasn't essential. Although it happened in Hibbing, Minnesota, and I would have loved to have seen Kathleen, the sheriff, come back for a cameo in Hibbing 911 all those years later at the sheriff's convention with Donna and Jody.
Right. Yeah, that would have been funny. Yeah.
I can just imagine them at the bar where she sees the boys, but she knows them under a different set of names, and she greets them, and Donna and Jody kind of look at each other like, but, and have her dragged in. I would just love to have seen that. And of course, we didn't get that. And there's also, did we ever see Sam and Dean in state trooper uniforms again? Because they dressed up as state troopers. They've been priests, they've been fish and wildlife. I don't ever remember seeing them as state troopers again after that episode. And there's the line, never do that again, never go missing like that. I'm not looking for you, that Dean tells Sam.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, that doesn't work out. And I think we hit a lot of the things in Faith, some of those quotes about you can't play God. It's hard to believe in something so much and have it disappoint you like that. They really set that up well, whether they intended to or not, with a lot of those quotes about faith and belief that play out in a very different way than I think they could have possibly foreseen that far back. They never expected to go 15 years. The two that I wish had been part of it, and while they're technically Monster of the Week, I think they showed a lot about the boys' relationship, are Asylum and Scarecrow, because we got to see the tension under the surface, that there was some resentment, there was some anger. Sure, maybe it got blown out of proportion, but much as they were, close and cared about each other, it wasn't perfect. And some of that kind of sets up the friction for later. So I thought that without those, if you were telling somebody, well, watch these 75 episodes and you'll have a good idea of what Supernatural is about, I think without at least one of those, you'd be missing a big chunk. And I do agree also about Cassie in Route 666. While we did have the problematic racist truck.
I like the way that you frame it. Yeah.
But I really liked Cassie. She was a Spitfire. She held her own, and she saw right through Dean's BS, and she knew it wasn't going to turn into anything, much as she liked him. And she was doing something important where she was. And I thought that was a very interesting character. I appreciated that episode a lot more on the rewatch than I think I had on the most recent rewatch than I think I had just, watching the episodes the first time through, or the other 2 or 3 rewatches, as one does. So now if we're looking at which you would add, and there doesn't have to be any, Entertainment Weekly took 4 or 5, but whatever subset you would add or something you want to mention about some of the other episodes, or episodes you wish hadn't been there at all, what would you like to add? Alexander, let's start with you.
So honestly, another one of those that I think is really important is Phantom Traveler. Just because, it's the first time we see demons, we pretty much establish everything, even though it's not quite the way it actually is going forward. I mean, like, you see the eyes, but they're not all the way black the way that they are in later episodes and later seasons. But you get the fact that they, a lot of times, they hook on to certain instances and certain ways that they kill, and it's really interesting just seeing the demons throughout this season as well, because we only see like 3, I think, if I'm counting correctly, because we get this demon, we got Meg and Azazel, and I think that's it that we get for it. But I think, just as important as demons are through the whole series, this episode is super important just to establish that lore. And we get the exorcism, we get all of that roped in there. So I think that's one that I would include in my top episodes of the season.
Okay, Carol.
Well, one thing that I enjoy when we go back to creepy, and I'm not a huge fan of creepy kids, but Provenance, however you want to say it, the movie with the painting, or the show with the episode with the painting. One of the things that I thought was interesting about that is that that actually Dean's the one who solves what's going on. Because they think they've taken care of everything, but the murder's still going on. And it turns out, because they were looking at the father rather than the little girl, because he notices that there's a picture within the picture, and it's something that he notices that Sam doesn't. And Sam has the reputation for being kind of the brains of the operation. He's got the academic background, he's got the skill set that he doesn't mind sitting there poring over the books or doing whatever. But it shows that Dean was able to spot something that Sam had missed. And so I thought that was interesting. And that actually plays into it was one that I just watched recently. And I don't know if it was the end of season 3 or the beginning of season 4, because I have to check in my notebook, which is right here. But there was something else that was similar to that, where it was something that Dean said, well, what about this? And that just hadn't occurred to Sam. And so it's always nice to see that there is more of a balance between them, and that it isn't just, okay, you're good at this part and I'm good at that part, that you need to be able to have both of those skills. So I did enjoy that one for that reason, and thought it was significant. And another one, a couple of you mentioned home, and of course that one is important for any number of reasons. But one of the others, I think it's the 3rd episode, was Dead in the Water. Amy Acker, yay! Does the Buffy and Angel fan? Yes. Okay. So it was nice to have her in there. And I had made a note that was the first episode that you actually got to see banter between the brothers, to where they were able to be a little more loose with each other and kind of having fun, rather than they may have made like a crack at each other or something, but not where it was necessarily kind of good-natured back and forth. And so I thought that was interesting. But also, we find out how much of an influence that Mary had on Dean when he's talking to the little boy in the episode. And he said, well, my mom used to tell me all the time that I needed to be brave. And I mean, there are other things too, but that particular instance, I thought that there were parallels there. And that that it just showed what kinds of what kinds of an influence that Mary did have.
I think it's interesting because Jensen said at, I think, one of the conventions that was such a terrifying episode for him filming because he felt so responsible for the safety of the little boy that he has in his arms when he dives in.
Oh, yeah.
And he's holding Lucas, and he comes up with Lucas in his arms. Well, there were two frogmen hanging onto his ankles, pulling him down.
Actual frogmen, but yeah, no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no,
we are talking about supernatural after all.
Yeah. And he was just so aware of that he had to keep this kid safe in real life in this, rather dangerous, potentially dangerous stunt. And I think that kind of adds a whole layer for me now when I watch that scene, that it's not just Dean showing some anxiousness about all this, but some of that's real because Jensen's feeling pretty anxious too.
Wow.
Angela, how about you?
I have a really hard time eliminating episodes. Like I said, I'm more of a fan of the Monster of the Week episodes. So generally speaking, I don't want to say I don't care about the story, but I can take or leave that kind. I don't like John Winchester. I'm going to say it. I just don't. So the story, like, it's important for the boys to go through all of that, but I'm just not a fan. So yeah, I don't know if I could get rid of any, but I do think that the Monster of the Week episodes kind of, especially in the first season, really lay a lot of the groundwork for future seasons and definitely helped build the world so that they could create this many good seasons. Not that they don't come up with, angels and everything later, but I really like the Monster of the Week episodes.
I do too. And that was one of the things that pulled me in, that first episode, even though I didn't watch it in real time when it aired, I came in halfway through season 11. It was like you had me at hello. Oh my gosh, this is everything I love about a show in one show. Where have you been all my life?
Yes.
And so I love those Monster of the Week ones. And I think it's really interesting when you watch how season 1 unfolds and how much backstory they give you without you feeling infodumped about the people and the lore and the creatures and the hunters and their family and them as people and all this. And it's just masterfully sprinkled in there until you get to the end of the season and you know how to kill demons and what to do with all these creatures. And you know all this stuff, but you weren't aware of learning it. And that's good writing. And I think Supernatural was so blessed with terrific writers. And then it kind of sets a bar very high when you're watching another show and it's trying to find its footing and you're going, okay, that was a massive 20-minute info dump we didn't need where nothing happened except people talking to each other. Could we please go on and shoot something? And Supernatural didn't do that to us. And that's really good writing most of the time anyhow.
Another one that's really helpful is Salvation. Started to give us a bit more about other hunters and the relationships that the hunters had. They're solitary guys and what they had for day jobs and what they did. And a lot of that was just such a mystery because Sam and Dean, they just didn't seem to do much besides hunt monsters. And they were giving us bits and pieces of other guys in there, and the fact that there was a loose network that we really don't get to see a whole lot of. And there's a lot of nice setup there for the finale and Salvation.
Yeah. Well, and you wonder as the series goes on, we know that John kept them away from the other hunters. Was it because John had a way with people, as Bobby says, and wasn't a very popular guy, or knowing or suspecting about Sam and the demon blood and all that? Was he in a ham-handed way protecting them from being around other people who might have gotten a whiff of something and come after him? We never know. They never closed that loop. Alexander, you said something about Phantom Traveler. And I think the line that hits me there now after all these years is when she comes at Sam, the ghost comes at Sam and he says, but I haven't been unfaithful. And she says, you will be. And we never, that's a really cryptic thing because he didn't cheat on Jess. He never really has another girlfriend long enough, thanks to Sam's stick of death. That kind of kills everybody.
I have never heard that before. That's perfect.
It's true. I'm sorry. But he doesn't have time to be unfaithful to most of the other people before they're dead. So who's he unfaithful to? Is he unfaithful to the family? Is he unfaithful to his brotherhood with Dean? Is he? And I've always thought that was one of the most cryptic comments in the series. And it's very early on. So where were they going to go with that?
Or maybe it was just the assumption that all men become unfaithful,
Well,
They
yeah, I
could've
think
just
that's
been a
probably how I
throwaway.
took it. Yeah.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
hadn't had a good experience, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could have just been bitterness. We also had, the other one that I love is Skin, because we get to see the shapeshifter. We get a glimpse of Sam's friendships with some of his college buddies,
Right.
which are ruined by the time the whole episode is over, even though they do save the girl. But that really sets up the whole shapeshifter thing. And of course, it complicates everything for them because now Dean's wanted for murder that he didn't do and then presumed dead. So I thought that added some nice twists and turns.
Mm. There is an episode that I would love to strike out of the season, and that's Hell House.
Thank you.
You a ghost facers hater?
Oh God, I
love
cannot stand them.
Those spacers.
Oh my God, they annoy the living shit out of me. I cannot.
Although I've got to say that in this world we've lived in for the last year, where everybody has set up a recording studio in their closet, in their spare bathroom, in their bedroom, that shot we see in one of the Ghost Facers episodes where it looks like they're in a parlor and they've got the whiteboard and everything, and then one of their dads raises the garage door and it knocks everything over.
Yeah, that's in season 2 or 3, right? I think. Yeah.
I think that's the second one, but I can relate to that a little more after.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the ghost facers though is, I think it's interesting hearing your reaction, Alexander, and then having, people on the panels that we've been doing for the rewind. Yeah, they seem to be, I think it's Beth who does like the ghost facers. That's because she works used to do ghost tours and stuff like that. So she said she actually knew people like that. I don't find them to be a problem for me. I think they're amusing. There's certainly interesting foils for Sam and Dean because they're doing something. And the other thing is they've got great equipment. They've got all this wonderful equipment that actually works. They don't have any idea what to do once you actually find something, but they've got this great equipment. So, at least we see more of that, as you were talking about, Gail, in that second episode. But anyway, I just think it's interesting how much people dislike them for some reason.
I do think that Dean's reaction to them is so totally Dean, and he's just like, get out of my way.
Yeah.
I think they bleep him, which we know that if this wasn't on network TV, they would have had much more colorful language. He actually gets bleeped there. I think the only other time he ever gets bleeped is in Scooby Natural, which was fun to see. And, the way they set the ghost facers up at the end to make sure nobody takes seriously anything they report about the Winchesters is malicious, but kind of funny. when Sam has them thinking that they've got a Hollywood deal. And
Right,
course-
right.
Mhm.
So they're off on their way. Yeah, that was funny.
What I think is funny about that episode too is the establishment of the tulpa, because
Mhm.
it's kind of
Mhm.
like with House, how everything could be lupus, and it's like one of the first things that they always look for. It tulpa and ghost is kind of one of those things in Supernatural that's like they don't know what it is. Could be a tulpa. It's
That's
never
right.
a tulpa, but except for the one time in the beginning that it was a tulpa. But you hear that a lot through the series, especially those Monster of the Week episodes where they don't know what's going on. Could be a tulpa.
Tulpa is the lupus of the supernatural world.
Yeah. There you go.
Missouri Mosley is also a character that has had a much longer and more vibrant life in fan fiction than in the show itself. I think she only shows up in 2 episodes, and that had something to do with the actress's availability.
Mm.
I would have loved to have seen Missouri playing more of a role, and in the anime version, she does. She shows up and is much more present for both John and the boys. But I would have loved to have seen them have her as an ally in more of the show. I know it wasn't
Mhm.
possible, but she was just such a potentially interesting character, and she yelled at Dean for things he was thinking about but hadn't done.
Right, right. And she took John to task, which would please Angela. Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
always when Sam and Dean interact with a mother figure who treats them like sons. And, sometimes that's Ellen calling them on their BS, but Missouri just basically told Dean to don't put your feet on the coffee table. You were thinking about it. And they're so
Yeah.
taken back because they've never had a mother to treat them like errant
Right.
little boys. And so when it happens to them, these 2 big, scary monster hunters just kind of look like, what do I
Yes,
do now?
ma'am.
I have to shoot her. What do I do now? And they're so flummoxed. It's wonderful to see, and that's great acting from Jared and Jensen, of course. But that they can face down vampires, but don't put your feet on my coffee table. Seems like, what do I do now?
Well, it's kind of like I don't know if it's the first time that they're at the Roadhouse or the second time. And I think it must be the second time when Joe is talking to Dean a little bit more, and he said something. He's looking over at Ellen, and then he's looking back at Joe, and he said something about your mother, and she said, "What, you're afraid of my mother?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so." So it's kind of, she had that presence as well. Yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, Dean never ran into a girlfriend who had parents to deal with. That whole meeting the parents thing, even with Lisa, was never an issue. And I think by the time he met Cassie, her father was. Did he ever meet her father, or was he already dead? And that was so. Yeah, meeting Ellen and Ellen's protectiveness of Joe would have been something that was not in Dean's vocabulary.
And yet he knew. He knew from the looks of what was going on. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. Which of the episodes haven't we talked about? Anything there? I mean, I loved Hookman. I'm there, right there with you, Angela, on the Monster of the Week.
I've got another one for you.
Go ahead.
Episode 14, Nightmare. It's actually pretty important. Just seeing, another psychic, another who we presume is, one of the special children. And getting to see more of Sam's, the fact that Sam has possible telekinetic powers as well, because he's able to move he's trapped in the closet, right?
It's like an armoire or something.
Yeah, and he's able to
door.
He's able to move it. But I think that one was a really good, just emotionally, that one was a really good episode as well. And it's kind of one of the harder ones to get through just because of everything that Max went through. It's Max, right? It's been so long.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, everything that Max went through, and just it's one of the harder episodes, really, just because I think for a lot of people they can really resonate with it. And also the fact that it's one of the ones where they don't get to save the day at the end of the day, that they come away with a loss. And it's one of the few times in the series so far that you've really seen them get a loss and not really fix the issue or solve the issue. Like in some of the other episodes, you have people that have died and they're not able to save, but they're able to beat whatever monster it is. And this time they can't. It's taken out of their hands, and you kind of get to see them have to deal with that and the aftermath of that.
Well, I think it also resonates with the sympathy for the monster that is a growing theme throughout the show. What makes the monster monstrous? Why is the monster a monster? Because you did feel bad for Max, and you couldn't help feeling like the people he killed kind of had it coming. And so it was gray. It was very gray, because what he did was wrong, but nobody else was going to stand up for him. And so you could kind of see that start to sink in, even with Dean, who has a little more of the black and white view of the world. I loved how in that Dean is trying so hard to be supportive and accepting of Sam, even though this whole psychic thing is kind of freaking him out and everything he's been taught. But until the angels really get in there and start manipulating and his hell guilt and all that, Dean's trying to be on Sam's side. And I love some of the alternate fan fiction stories that get written about that, where that wedge doesn't get pushed between them, because it's kind of interesting to think of what would have happened if Dean had said, you know what, I don't care, you're my brother, you can grow horns if you want to, I'm with you all the way. You want to be the boy king of hell, I'll go with you. Totally different show, but it would have been interesting.
Yeah. It's important too that they show them not always winning. Because otherwise there's never any tension, because they're always going to win.
Sort of like dying, only then it becomes, how are they coming back this time?
Yeah.
Right. But you never know what's really going to happen on the show, and that helps a whole lot. It's one of the reasons the show is so well written.
They do have losses throughout. I'm much later, I think it's American Nightmare, the one with Magda and the stigmata and the crazy religious parents. They save her, and then Ketch kills her, and we're all just staring at the screen going, did I just see that? Did they just do that? Wait.
Does that a lot. Oh
yeah. So I think you're right. It definitely keeps that tension there that this might not work out okay. Any last words about season 1, or what you thought was essential? I want to mention one thing, which is on the music side of things. Season 1 on Netflix does not have the same music as season 1 in the DVDs, because they didn't know the show was going to be a big hit. They hadn't worked out the music rights. So the music on the DVD is the original music that aired when the show was on broadcast. But Netflix music is kind of, it's not as good. They kind of had one-offs, but it's not the famous music that you hear in season 1. So if you haven't ever watched it on DVD, the soundtrack for season 1, music-wise, is completely different.
Did not
Weird.
know that.
Yeah, and after that, they got it right, and all of the rest of them match Netflix or DVD, but season 1 does not. And the music is so important in the show, to have that not be the same is kind of strange. Any other thoughts about what's essential before we wrap up and tell everybody where to find us?
Well, I thought Something Wicked was also, that was the only other one that we haven't already talked about. It was on my list, and mainly because that's the one with the Striga, and we get the background of, what had happened with Sam and Dean when they were kids. And of course, John was gone, as Angela would like to point out. Sorry. but he comes up a lot in our discussions. That's right. He does come up a lot on our rewind discussions. Just, the parallels between Dean and the older brother of the two kids, that, the current situation and how he feels responsible for it. And at the end of the episode, Sam says that he wishes that he could have that kind of innocence of not knowing what was out there in the dark. And Dean's comment is, well, if it means anything, I wish you could too. And so, that he, that even after everything they've seen and done, that he still feels that way, that's still his little brother. And, so that to me was kind of an interesting one, just showing those ties to the past and how it affected their present.
Well, and the answered thing there, and this goes again to Angela's comment about John, is John bursts in as soon as the Striga shows up. So John was using them as bait. He had to have been where he could watch them, or he couldn't have shown up. So John was somewhere using both boys as bait. Angela?
What I liked what you were talking about, because it shows when Dean started taking this kind of, it's almost like ridiculous responsibility for Sam. It's because of the way their dad was and how they grew up. But that episode, we actually see it playing out and why it's that way. And I think that's really important for understanding the brothers' relationship and why Dean can't just let Sam be Sam in a lot of ways.
Right. Well, we are out of time. This has been wonderful. I'm looking forward to hashing it out about what's essential for season 2. But before we wrap up, let's go around quickly and let everybody know where they can find you online, starting with you, Elektra.
Elektra Hammond, www.untilmidnight.com has all the essential information. That's it.
Alexander?
You can find me online at alexandergideon.net. There's links to all of my social media there, as well as links to all of my books, events that I'm going to be at, all of that information. You can also, of course, if you just want to skip the website, you can find me on Twitter at alexandergideon. At Alexander Gideon. You can find me on Facebook, just search Alexander GR Gideon, and you can find me on TikTok at Alex Gideon Author.
And Carol?
Yes, the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track does have an active all year Facebook page. And if you go to Facebook and just type in DragonCon Urban Fantasy, we will come up. That's probably the best way to follow news and information about what the track itself is doing. I do have a Twitter account also, but that doesn't get quite as much action when it's not con season. So that'll pick up in a couple months. But for right now, it's, we still have some things on there. But our YouTube channel, again, if you just go to DragonCon Urban Fantasy, all of our content is there. All of the virtual panels that we did for con last year and everything that I've done since the con was, ended, including supernatural panels.
Okay, Angela?
If you go to CameronQuinnBooks.com, that's where you can find all of my urban fantasy and things like that. And you can read my short, How to Abduct an Alien, for free if you sign up. And you can find my romantic suspense at angelabreen.club.
You can find me online at gailzmartin.com and morganbryce.com. All of my social media, if you put the names in and look, you'll find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, all the other social media sites, but mostly you can find me here at Continual. So thank you to our wonderful panelists for a great discussion on what's essential in season 1. And thank all of you for watching and listening. We'll be back with more Supernatural here on Continual. So we'll see you online.